Anna Garcia was 32 and had hands marked by water and soap, but also by a quiet care that no one ever applauded. She worked as a live-in housekeeper at the Caldwell's home in a lavish Los Angeles neighborhood, far from the humble apartment over a garage where her grandmother and younger brother lived. They called on her for everything: to clean, to serve, to accompany them to the memorial masses for the departed father-in-law. In the main dining room hung the portrait of Mr. Ernest, 80 years old, with a firm and kind gaze. Every time Anna dusted the gilded frame, she felt that those eyes did not belong to a dead man. The portrait had been hung shortly after his supposed passing, almost 2 years ago, in a discreet ceremony she hadn't witnessed because she was still working at another house at the time. When she started at the Caldwell mansion 6 months later, the mourning already seemed more like protocol than pain. Mrs. Camilla, wife of Alexander, the heir, wore somber colors for the first few weeks, but soon returned to vibrant tones and frequent trips to the salon. Alexander, always absorbed in folders and phone calls, from the investment bank where he worked, mentioned his father only on specific dates, with a polite sadness that quickly dissipated. Anna cleaned that portrait every Monday after serving breakfast. The light from the window hit the canvas differently depending on the time of day, and she began to notice small details. The date painted in the lower right corner, which indicated the work had been commissioned just 3 months before the announced death. The fact that in the photographs scattered around the house, Mr. Ernest always appeared thinner, more stooped, while in the portrait he looked robust, almost vigorous. Something didn't add up. A feeling she couldn't name, but that tightened in her chest every time she looked into those painted eyes. Her character was forged from restrained courage and a faith she practiced in secret, with a small rosary she kept hidden in her apron pocket. She would pray softly while scrubbing the kitchen floor, asking for protection for her grandmother, who suffered from high blood pressure and depended on the medication Anna bought every month with her salary. She had a deep sense of justice and an obsessive attention to detail, but she carried an old guilt. Years ago, she hadn't defended her own mother when she was mistreated by a boss who unjustly accused her of theft. Anna was just a teenager, but the image of her mother crying in the kitchen, silently begging her daughter not to say anything so they wouldn't lose their livelihood, had seared her soul like a branding iron. Since then, she feared speaking up and not being heard, feared losing the job that sustained her family. The victim Anna's heart had chosen to protect was precisely this man in the painting, the father of Alexander, the heir. She had never known him alive, never spoken to him, but something in the house screamed that his absence was a well-told lie. Perhaps it was the way Camilla averted her gaze when someone mentioned Mr. Ernest, or the haste with which Alexander changed the subject whenever Anna asked about the masses. There was a tension in the air, as thin as a spider's thread, that only someone who cleaned every corner of the house could perceive. Her first immediate goal was to keep her job to continue buying her grandmother's medication. Francesca, 78, lived in a small apartment in Boyle Heights, in a little room with exposed brick walls where Anna's 17-year-old brother also slept. He studied at night and worked as a construction worker's assistant during the day. Money was always tight. Anna sent almost everything home, keeping only what was necessary for transportation and some second-hand clothes she bought at the flea market. Losing her job meant leaving her grandmother without medicine, her brother without a chance to continue his studies. This fear would wake her up at 3 in the morning, with a racing heart and sweaty palms. The second goal, more nebulous but equally urgent, was to understand why Mrs. Camilla, Alexander's wife, reacted with such tension whenever someone mentioned his father. Anna had noticed that at dinners with guests, when an old family friend asked about Mr. Ernest, Camilla would interrupt with a practiced smile and a comment about how remembering just hurts, or how Ernest is at peace now. It's better not to stir up the past. Alexander agreed, He always agreed, with the obedience of an only child accustomed to letting his wife handle domestic matters. The obstacles appeared early. On a practical level, the house was full of locked doors, security cameras, and strict rules. Camilla's office was forbidden territory, the medicine cabinet was kept locked, and the late-night doctor's visits were never to be mentioned. Anna cleaned the hallways and saw the cameras blinking red, knowing her every move was being recorded. On an emotional level, the fear of confronting a wealthy, elegant woman who could fire her with a single word squeezed her chest like a closed fist. Camilla had this ability to make you feel small without ever raising her voice, just with a sidelong glance, a comment about how some people just don't understand their place. Still, Anna watched. She discreetly jotted down times in a small shopping notebook she always carried. Tuesday, 11:30 p.m., doctor arrived through the back door. Wednesday, 3 p.m., Camilla left with a black briefcase. She recognized logos on pill boxes she found in the recycling bin, the bin only she sorted through before taking it out. She followed Camilla's red key fob with her eyes, which she never left unattended, always tucked away in the designer handbag that hung from her shoulder like an extension of her own body. At night, before sleeping in the small room next to the kitchen, a space of maybe 100 square feet that could only fit a narrow bed and a shelf with her folded clothes, Anna would press her forehead against the cool wall and murmur silently, "Lord, give me eyes to see and the courage not to stay silent." The words came out almost without a sound, just a movement of her lips, because the walls were thin and Camilla slept on the floor above. But Anna needed to say it, needed to ask, because faith was all she had left when fear threatened to paralyze her. In the cracked mirror above the sink, she saw her own tired face, the sunken eyes, the premature lines around her mouth. She looked older than she was, but in her eyes there was still a spark, a quiet stubbornness that came from far away, perhaps from her mother, perhaps from her grandmother, perhaps from all the women in her lineage who learned to survive by bending but never completely breaking. And as she looked at that spark reflected in the mirror, Anna knew with a certainty that came not from reason but from her gut, that something was deeply wrong in that elegant house and that sooner or later she would have to make a choice. Stay silent and safe, or risk everything for a truth that perhaps no one wanted to hear. Mornings at the mansion began before dawn. The silence of the polished hallways was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the whir of the blender in the kitchen. Anna prepared the green juices Camilla drank to detoxify her body, while listening to her video calls with friends who talked about trips, jewelry, and exclusive clinics. This noise of status clashed with the murmur of the housekeepers who exchanged recipes and worries about the rent. Lydia, the other housekeeper who came 3 times a week to help with laundry and heavy cleaning, was 45 and had hands even more worn than Anna's. She worked in 4 different houses, always rushing from one place to another, always with that expression of exhaustion she no longer tried to hide. The two would meet in the laundry room, that space at the back of the house where the smell of fabric softener mixed with the hot steam from the machines. There, among white sheets and fluffy towels they could never afford, they exchanged confidences in low voices. It was on one of those mornings, while folding a king-size sheet that seemed to have no end, that Anna noticed the first detail that unsettled her. A box of strong sedatives, thrown in Camilla's bathroom trash, with the same logo of a private psychiatric clinic she had seen on the tag of Dr. Sullivan's briefcase, the doctor who came in at night through the service entrance. The box wasn't on the list of medications for any member of the household. The list Camilla kept pinned to the medicine cabinet door with a butterfly-shaped magnet. Anna saved the clinic's name in her notebook as if it were just a brand of milk she needed to remember to buy. St. Raphael's Wellness Retreat, she wrote in tiny letters, below the note about the time the doctor had arrived last Tuesday. The notebook was small, with a faded blue cover, the kind they sell for a couple of bucks at the corner store. No one would suspect that it was being used to record secrets that could shake the very foundation of that family. While sweeping the hallway that led to the storage room, she heard a faint squeak of metal wheels. She stopped, gripped the broom tighter, felt her heart race. She looked around, made sure she was alone. She approached the slightly ajar door and peeked through a crack. She caught a fleeting glimpse of a folded wheelchair, hidden among blankets and old cardboard boxes. The security cameras were pointed in another direction, as if someone had calculated the angles with surgical precision. Anna felt a pang in her stomach, that feeling you get when you know you've discovered something you shouldn't have. If no one in the house used a wheelchair, why was there a list for monthly maintenance taped next to it with yellowed adhesive tape? The handwriting was Camilla's, that perfect script of someone who went to Catholic school. The list read, check locks, last check 0315, next 0415. She began to gather discrete signs, like someone assembling a puzzle without the reference picture on the box. A smell of hospital disinfectant on Camilla's clothes after her supposed spa sessions. That unmistakable scent Anna knew well from the time she took her grandmother to the community clinic. Crumpled taxi receipts for trips to the same clinic whose logo she had copied, found in the office trash when she went to empty the bin on Fridays. Camilla's insistence that no one ask about Alexander's father anymore because remembering just hurts, repeated like a mantra whenever a guest mentioned Mr. Ernest. At the same time, Anna's internal conflict grew like a poisonous plant in her chest. She tried to tell Lydia something on a rainy afternoon while they were hanging clothes on the covered line in the service area. The sky was gray, threatening a storm, and the cold wind made the shirts dance like ghosts. Anna started cautiously, asking if Lydia didn't find. It's strange that there were never any recent photos of Mr. Ernest, if it wasn't weird that Camilla went out so much at night. Lydia stopped hanging the clothes, looked around nervously, moved closer to Anna, and whispered with wide eyes, "Don't get involved, girl. People who talk too much around here don't last." Her hands were trembling when she picked up the clothespins again. "I need this job, you need this job. What they do or don't do is none of our business. We're invisible, remember? It's better that way." Lydia's words echoed in Anna's head for days. Invisible. Yes, they were invisible. Camilla would pass them in the hallways without saying good morning. Alexander sometimes forgot Anna was in the room when he spoke on the phone about confidential business deals. The dinner guests talked about politics and art as if the housekeepers were furniture, pieces of decor incapable of hearing or understanding. That invisibility hurt, but Anna was beginning to realize it could also be an advantage. No one watches someone they consider irrelevant. The obstacles rose like ever higher walls. Socially, she began to feel the disbelief in the security guards' eyes when she passed them. One of them, the youngest, made a snide comment about housekeepers who want to be detectives. The humiliation came on a Thursday, during a dinner with 6 guests. Anna had served the soup and, while clearing Camilla's plate, the silverware accidentally slipped and made a sharp clatter against the china. The silence at the table was instantaneous. Camilla turned slowly with that icy smile she used when she wanted to appear polite in front of visitors. "Anna," she said in a sweet but firm voice, "you've been very distracted lately. Perhaps it's too much work, or perhaps you're thinking about things. You shouldn't be." The guests chuckled discreetly, that laugh of social embarrassment. Anna lowered her head, apologized, and felt her face burn with shame. Calling her distracted in front of everyone was a way of marking her, of saying she wasn't trustworthy, that maybe it was time to look for another housekeeper. Materially, access to documents and medications became increasingly restricted. New locks on drawers, changed alarm codes, conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Camilla had started locking her office, something she had never done before. The medicine cabinet now had a digital lock that beeped if anyone tried to open it without the code. Even so, every small victory, like memorizing the clinic's number from the taxi receipt, 5555-22847, or keeping an empty blister pack of sedatives that Camilla had thrown in the trash, came at a price. Sleepless nights, wondering if she was doing the right thing or just building castles in the air. Fear of being discovered every time she wrote something in her notebook. A delayed call to her grandmother to save phone credit because she needed to save every penny in case she was fired without notice. Before sleeping, she would clutch her rosary tightly, feeling the worn beads between her fingers. She would just say softly, "If this is from you, don't leave me alone." Faith was her only certainty in a world that felt like quicksand. She had been raised by her grandmother in a house where they prayed before every meal, where the Bible was always open on the living room table, where they believed that God saw all injustices and would one day bring justice. Anna needed to believe that, because if there was no divine justice, then the world was just a place where the rich did whatever they wanted and the poor suffered in silence. One Monday morning, while cleaning Mr. Ernest's portrait, she paused for a moment and looked deep into those painted eyes. "You're alive, aren't you?" she whispered to the canvas. "And if you are, I'm going to find you, even if it costs me everything I have." The portrait didn't answer, of course, but Anna felt a strange warmth in her chest, as if she had just made a promise she couldn't break. She left the room with the feeling that something had changed, that there was no turning back. It was her against the silence, her against the well-dressed lie, her against the fear that had haunted her since childhood. And this time, unlike what had happened with her mother, this time she was not going to be silent. Dr. Sullivan began to appear more frequently, always in an impeccable suit and with a professional smile. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair slicked back with gel and gold-rimmed glasses that reflected the light from the hallway lamps. With the housekeepers, he was courteous but distant, the kind of cold politeness that keeps people in their place without needing to be rude. He would greet them with a nod, sometimes say, "Good evening," as he passed, but he never made eye contact, never asked how they were. With Camilla, he spoke in low tones, using terms that sounded more like business than health. Anna, standing in the kitchen doorway, pretending to organize cups in the cabinet, caught fragments of conversations drifting down the hall. Controlled dosage, signature of the legal guardian, sealed records. Alexander, absorbed by his work at the bank, blindly trusted the doctor's reports and his wife's calm explanations. When he arrived home at 9 in the evening, tired and with his tie loosened, he accepted without question the information that Dr. Sullivan came by to do a routine checkup on your father's paperwork. Camilla's true motivation was becoming clear to anyone who cared to look. Keeping Mr. Ernest out of sight and sedated ensured that the entire management of the fortune remained in Alexander's hands, and consequently in hers. The main bank account, the properties, the shares in the import company the old man had founded 40 years ago, everything had officially passed to the son when the father was declared dead. But officially dead didn't mean actually dead, and this difference allowed for perfect control. Alexander signed the papers as the legal heir. Camilla guided every decision for the good of the family, and Mr. Ernest remained in a chemical limbo that prevented him from claiming anything. The doctor, indebted by a messy divorce and the cost of keeping his clinic running, found a steady source of income in this arrangement. He wasn't a monster who enjoyed others' pain. Anna had realized that from observing him. There was a weariness about him, a resignation, as if he had started with good intentions and had slowly given ground until he no longer recognized his own moral compass. He and Camilla weren't cruel people by nature, but they had reached a point where the moral line had blurred so much that agreeing to keep an elderly man semi-conscious, supposedly for his own good, seemed like a reasonable solution in exchange for financial stability. The first major crack in the established order came on a rainy afternoon. The clouds had been gathering since morning, dark and heavy, and when the storm finally broke, the entire city seemed to grind to a halt. Miguel, the driver who sometimes helped out, at the house and had known Anna from the neighborhood, arrived soaked through the kitchen door. He had brought the groceries and, as he shook the water from his jacket, he looked around to make sure they were alone. "Anna," he said in a low voice, "I need to show you something." She was drying dishes by the sink and she felt her stomach tighten. Miguel was a good man, about 40, a father of 3, who had worked for the family for almost 10 years. He knew Anna because his sister lived in the same apartment complex as her, grandmother, and there was a kind of trust between them born of a shared background, of the silent understanding of people who come from the same unpaved streets. He took his phone out of his pocket, checked again that they were alone, and discreetly showed her the screen. It was a ride history, a list of addresses and times that the taxi app automatically saved. Anna saw several entries for the same clinic with the logo she had copied in her notebook, St. Raphael's Wellness Retreat. Always at night, always with the same pattern. Camilla would leave the house at 10, stay there for about an hour, and return at midnight. "Look at this one." Miguel swiped his finger across the screen, pointing to a specific note. "Patient drop-off, Caldwell, guardian signature, C. Caldwell." The date was from 8 months ago. Anna felt her legs go weak. She leaned against the kitchen counter. This was more than a vague suspicion, more than a gut feeling. It was written, documented confirmation that someone with the last name Caldwell was a patient at that clinic, and that Camilla had signed as the guardian. "Why are you showing me this?" Anna asked, her voice barely a whisper. Miguel put his phone away, ran a hand over his rain-streaked, tired face. "Because I've known you since you were a kid. Because I saw your mother suffer an injustice and I don't want to see the same thing happen to you. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have a father, too. And if someone did to him what I think they're doing to old Mr. Caldwell, I'd want someone to tell me." That document, a direct consequence of the clues Anna had gathered over weeks, changed the course of her suspicion. It was no longer just about hidden medications, strange nightly visits, or a wheelchair hidden in a storage room. It was about an institutionalization bearing the family name, about a man everyone thought was dead, but who might be alive and trapped in a clinic room, kept there by the will of the person who should have been protecting him. Anna decided she had to talk to Alexander. She waited until a night when he came home earlier at 8 and asked to speak with him. He was in the library, flipping through some papers, when she knocked on the half-open door. "Mr. Alexander, may I speak with you for a moment?" He nodded, yes, without taking his eyes off the documents. Anna entered, closed the door behind her, and felt her heart pound in her chest. She had barely begun to speak, to mention the clinic, the visits, the dates she had noted when Camilla threw the door open. She must have been in the living room and heard voices, or perhaps she was always on alert for suspicious movements in the house. Her eyes flashed when she saw Anna there, alone with Alexander, the door closed. "What is going on in here?" she asked with that venomous sweetness she used as a weapon. Anna tried to explain, but Camilla cut her off, turning to Alexander with an expression of wounded surprise. "Darling, I think we need to talk about Anna. This morning I noticed a bracelet was missing from my dresser. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, but she has access to the room, and now this strange conversation, these nonsensical accusations about clinics and visits." Alexander frowned, looking at Anna with confusion. The young housekeeper felt the floor drop out from under her. I didn't take any bracelet, ma'am. I just wanted to— Of course you'll deny it. Camilla crossed her arms, tilting her head with practiced pity. Alexander, I think it's best if Anna goes home for tonight. We can discuss her situation here calmly tomorrow. Humiliated and on the verge of being fired, Anna left the library on shaky legs. She went back to her small room by the kitchen, sat on the narrow bed, and let the tears fall in silence. She thought about giving up, about going back to a simpler job, maybe as a day cleaner, where she wouldn't have to live in the house, where she wouldn't get involved with dangerous secrets. The memory of her mother, defenseless in the face of injustice, shot through her like lightning. She saw her mother in that old kitchen, her face swollen from crying, begging for silence because they needed the money, accepting the humiliation to avoid starvation. "No," Anna said aloud to the empty room. "Not again. Not to me." The subplots intertwined with the central issue. Lydia, who had spent the afternoon helping with the bedding, found Anna in her room later after Camilla had gone up to bed. She sat, next to her on the bed, with those deep, dark circles that never left her face. "I know what you're doing," she said softly. "And I'm scared for you, but I need to tell you something." She paused, wringing her hands in her lap. "My brother was admitted to that same clinic 2 years ago. The family said it was for detox, that he drank too much, that it was for his own good. When he came back 3 months later, he wasn't the same person. More subdued, slower. He barely recognized his own home. His eyes—" Lydia shuddered. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had forgotten how to live. Anna took Lydia's hand, felt how cold it was. "Did he get better?" "Depends on what you call better. He stopped drinking, yes, but he also stopped laughing, singing, arguing about baseball. He became a shadow." Lydia wiped away a stubborn tear. "If Mr. Ernest is in there, Anna, it has to be for something very wrong. That place doesn't heal anyone. It just erases them." Miguel, for his part, was facing his own fears. He passed through the kitchen the next day while Anna was preparing breakfast, with trembling hands, and whispered, "Be careful. Mrs. Camilla asked about my phone, wanted to know if I showed anything to anyone. I denied everything, but she's suspicious. If they find out I helped you, I'll lose my job and my kids depend on it." Anna understood. Every person who helped her was risking their own livelihood. It wasn't a simple, clear-cut battle between good and evil. It was a war fought in the shadows, where the enemy used money, social standing, and fear as weapons, and where the Allies had hungry families waiting at home. Each of her objectives, to protect the old man, to gather evidence, to speak with Alexander, stumbled over dual obstacles: the subtle manipulation of Camilla and the doctor, who painted her as unstable or a thief, and her own limitations, her fear of authority that came from a lifetime of being treated as inferior, her lack of education, a lawyer, or even the money to make copies of documents. But that night, looking at the portrait of Mr. Ernest that she could see from the library door, Anna murmured in a broken but firm voice, "If he's still alive, even if no one believes me now, one day the truth will have a voice." She clutched the rosary in her apron pocket, felt the beads worn smooth from use, and knew she couldn't stop. She had come too far to turn back. Now it was only a matter of time until everything came to light, or until she was destroyed trying to bring it to light. And Anna Garcia, daughter of a humiliated woman, granddaughter of a resilient woman, chose to believe that light always wins, even when it takes time, even when it costs everything. The night everything changed came without warning. Anna was sleeping lightly, as always, ready to wake at the slightest noise. Her phone vibrated on the makeshift nightstand beside her bed, the old device with a cracked screen she'd been using for 3 years. It was 2:15 a.m. Miguel's name flashed on the screen. She answered, her heart already racing, because a call at that hour never brought good news. Anna. His voice was tense, muffled, as if he were speaking from inside his car. I overheard a conversation tonight. Dr. Sullivan and Mrs. Camilla. They were talking about transferring the patient to a more discreet facility if certain papers aren't signed in time. They said it needs to be done soon, that there's a deadline. Anna sat up in bed, her free hand clutching the thin sheet. Transfer him where? I don't know. But the way they talked... Anna, if Mr. Ernest is in that clinic and they're going to move him, it might be now or never. After this, nobody might ever find him again. She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. What do I do? I don't know. I just thought you needed to know. There was a pause. I'll have the cab running on the corner if you need it. But Anna, think carefully. This could cost you your job, or worse. She hung up and sat in the darkness of her small room, listening to her own breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She could pretend she hadn't heard anything, turn over, and go back to sleep. In the morning, she would still be the invisible housekeeper, safe in her anonymity. Or she could get up, get dressed, slip out the service door, and go after a truth that maybe no one wanted to confirm. She turned on the small lamp, picked up the faded blue notebook she kept under her pillow. She flipped through the pages of her notes. Times, names, addresses, fragments of conversations. It all led to one place. St. Raphael's Wellness Retreat. She grabbed her cheap phone with its bad but still functional camera, and she took the rosary that was hanging on a nail on the wall. She knew she had no more tools than these, the same ones her humble life had taught her to use. She dressed in silence, old jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, worn-out sneakers. She made no noise as she left through the service door, taking advantage of the exact time of the guard's shift change she had observed for weeks. She knew that at 2:30 a.m. for 15 minutes, the back door was without direct surveillance, while the night guard made his rounds through the garden and the early morning guard had not yet arrived. The cold night air hit her face like a slap. Miguel was waiting on the corner in his cab, lights off. She got into the back seat without a word. He looked at her in the rearview mirror, his tired eyes reflecting the yellow streetlight. Are you sure? No, Anna answered honestly, but I'm going anyway. The drive to the edge of the city was silent, broken only by the patter of rain on the windshield. It had started to rain again, that fine, cold, early morning rain that makes everything slick. The streets were empty, ghostly, lit only by the taxi's headlights and the occasional street lamp. Anna clutched her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. Our Father, Hail Mary, the prayers her grandmother had taught her before she even learned to read. The clinic's logo, the same one she had copied so many times in her notebook, glowed on the entrance sign like a bitter confirmation. St. Raphael's Wellness Retreat. Mental health and long-term care. The building was large, white, sterile, surrounded by high walls and perfectly manicured gardens. It looked like an expensive place, the kind where wealthy families checked in inconvenient relatives, far from the prying eyes of society. Wait for me here, Anna told Miguel. If I'm not back in an hour, just leave and forget you brought me. I'm not leaving you alone, he replied firmly. If you get into trouble, I'm coming in. Inside, everything smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion, that characteristic scent of hospitals and nursing homes that clings to clothes and lungs. The reception area was dimly lit. Only one on-duty nurse was reading a magazine behind the counter. Anna approached, her heart beating so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Good evening, she said, forcing her voice to sound calm. I'm here to visit a family member, patient Caldwell. The nurse looked up from her magazine, scanning Anna from head to toe with that look that assesses social class in seconds. Visiting hours are during the day, and you need to be on the authorized list. Anna closed her eyes for a second, praying for strength. I know it's after hours, but I've come a long way. My employer, Mr. Alexander Caldwell, asked me to check on his father. Dr. Sullivan was supposed to be arranging a transfer. At the mention of the doctor's name, she saw the nurse's expression change subtly. There was recognition there, maybe even discomfort. Dr. Sullivan isn't here at this hour. I know. That's why I came, to check on him before the transfer. Anna took the notebook from her pocket, showed her the notes, the names, the dates. She used every piece of information she had gathered over the weeks, mentioning details that only someone with inside access would know. She was betting everything on a single hand. The nurse hesitated. She glanced down the empty hallway at the clock on the wall, back at Anna. There was something in the young housekeeper's eyes, a determination mixed with desperation, that reminded her of her own sister, who had also worked in rich people's houses and been unjustly fired. Wait here, she said finally. She stood up and went through a side door. She returned minutes later with another woman, older, wearing a modified nun's habit. She was perhaps 60, her face lined with the wrinkles of someone who had seen a great deal in her life. I'm Sister Rosa, she introduced herself. The nurse said you mentioned Miguel, the taxi driver from the Santa Maria neighborhood? Anna nodded. I know his family. They're good people. She paused, measuring her words. What do you really want here? Anna decided on the plain truth. I believe that Mr. Ernest Caldwell, who everyone thinks is dead, is alive and being held here against his will. I believe they are keeping him sedated, and I believe that if I don't do something now, he will disappear, and no one will ever know the truth. Sister Rosa studied her in silence. Then she nodded slowly. I'm going to show you something, but in return, I need you to promise that this won't just end up as rumors. If you're going to make an accusation, it has to be serious, with witnesses, with proof. I can't risk my job and this institution's reputation over gossip. I promise, Anna said, and she knew that in promising, she was jeopardizing her own job, perhaps her own safety. They walked down a dimly lit corridor, the linoleum floor creaking under their feet. They passed several closed doors, some with names, others just with numbers. At the end of the hall, Sister Rosa stopped in front of a door marked 307. She inserted a key, opened it slowly. The room was small, smelling of medicine and loneliness. In a wheelchair positioned by the window, an 80-year-old man with thin white hair stared at the dark glass, where only his own distorted reflection was visible. Hearing the door, he slowly turned his head. His eyes were clouded, but the features of his face were unmistakable. Anna recognized them from the portrait, though his body now seemed smaller, more fragile, as if life had been partially drained from him. On the wall, taped up, was a small photograph with a name and admission date. Ernest Caldwell, admitted, March 15th, 2023. The impact made Anna tremble. Her legs nearly gave out, but she forced herself to take a step forward. With shaky hands, she activated her phone's camera. She needed proof, not just a testimony. She leaned down next to the old man, speaking softly. Mr. Ernest, my name is Anna Garcia. I work at your son Alexander's house. His eyes slowly focused, as if peering through a fog. His lips moved with effort. Alex-ander? Yes, your son. Do you remember him? A tear rolled down his wrinkled face. My son. The voice was a hoarse whisper. Where is he? Anna filmed everything, her hands shaking so much the image was blurry, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the voice, the face, the living proof. Then, with fingers slick with nervous sweat, she dialed Alexander's number. He took 4 rings to answer, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hello?" The cry erupted from Anna's soul, cutting through hallways, years of silence, generations of quieted women. "Your father is alive! He's here, in this clinic, in a wheelchair he doesn't need!" On the other end, shocked silence. Then, "What? Anna, are you—" "St. Raphael's Wellness Retreat, room 307. Come now, please." The obstacles immediately converged. A security guard appeared at the door, alerted by the nervous front desk nurse. He tried to remove Anna from the room, shoving her roughly. She protected the phone with her body, falling to the floor and slamming her knee on the cold linoleum. Sharp pain shot up her leg, but she didn't let go of the phone. "You're trespassing on private property," the guard yelled. "I'm calling the police." Sister Rosa planted herself between him and Anna. "She has my authorization. And before you call anyone, I think you'd better explain to the director why we have a patient here who has been sedated for over a year with no registered family visits." The guard backed away, confused. Anna struggled to her feet, her knee throbbing. She looked at Mr. Ernest, who was watching everything with the frightened eyes of a lost child. "It's okay," she said to him, trying to sound firm. "Your son is on his way. It's going to be okay." And as she waited, clutching the phone with the evidence, feeling the pain in her leg and the fear in her chest, Ana Garcia knew that the second great revelation had been made. Suspicion had become living proof, and there was no going back. The next day, the sunlight did little to ease the tension. Alexander arrived at the clinic in a wrinkled suit, his face a mess, his phone still echoing with Anna's cry. He hadn't slept after the call, had dressed in a hurry, and left the house without telling Camilla, who was pretending to be asleep in the next room. During the entire cab ride, he had tried to convince himself that it was a mistake, a mix-up, that Anna was wrong or that someone had deceived her. But when the door to room 307 opened, and he saw the old man in the wheelchair, when he recognized his father's eyes despite the fog that covered them, when he heard that weak voice say, "Son," Alexander's world collapsed like a house of cards. He fell to his knees, on the cold clinic floor, sobbing in a way he hadn't since he was a child. Anna discreetly stepped back, giving them space, her knees still aching but her heart relieved of a strange weight. She had seen rich men cry before, but always restrained, polite tears. This was different. This was the raw pain of someone who had discovered he had been deceived by the people he trusted most. Dr. Sullivan arrived an hour later, summoned by the front desk. He tried to buy time talking about protocols, administrative mix-ups, using that medical jargon that imposes distance and authority. But Sister Rosa, holding the rosary Anna had given her as a promise to do the right thing, stood in front of the door and confirmed in a firm voice that the elderly man inside had been sedated for over a year under the signature of Camilla Caldwell. "There are records," she said, holding a folder of documents she had retrieved from the archives. "Dosages of sedatives that no normal protocol would justify. Nightly visits from the same person. Renewals of admission without an independent psychiatric evaluation. Regular wire transfers." Each word was a stone thrown into the lake of the well-constructed lie, creating ripples that could no longer be contained. Dr. Sullivan turned pale, searching for words that wouldn't come. He wasn't a violent or cruel man, just someone who had compromised too much for stability, and now he was seeing the true cost of that compromise. The scene later moved to a white room with cold walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs. In the presence of a health official and a union lawyer, called by Miguel using contacts from the taxi drivers' union, the papers spoke for themselves. Admissions, prescriptions, bank transfers to the clinic from accounts managed by Camilla. Everything matched the objects, records, and routines Anna had observed. The boxes of sedatives, the late-night taxis, The wheelchair hidden in the storage room, the whispered conversations, the tension whenever someone mentioned Mr. Ernest. Camilla arrived wrapped in an expensive gray wool coat, wearing a French perfume that filled the room before her voice even echoed. She wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast day, a designer bag hanging from her arm like a shield. Her response was in line with what she had always shown: control, measured tears, a rehearsed speech. She sat with perfect posture, crossed her legs, and removed the sunglasses to reveal dry eyes trying to appear moist. "I did everything for the family," she began in a trembling but calculated voice. "Alexander's father started having violent episodes, moments of dementia. He would attack, scream, not recognize anyone. It was dangerous, shameful." She paused dramatically. "Alexander could never have handled seeing him like that. I wanted to spare him that pain." Alexander, sitting across the table, looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "You took my father from me. You made me believe he was dead. You made me cry at a fake funeral." "To protect you," she insisted, her voice rising. "To protect our marriage, our social standing. Imagine the scandal if people knew that Ernest Caldwell was in a nursing home, sedated, drooling. The family would have been destroyed." The health official, a middle-aged man with the weary air of someone who had seen many similar cases, leafed through the documents. "Mrs. Caldwell, it says here that Mr. Ernest was admitted with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder with psychotic episodes. But there is no independent psychiatric evaluation. All prescriptions are signed by Dr. Sullivan, who receives direct payments from you. This constitutes a conflict of interest and possible fraud." Camilla tried to change tactics, turning to Anna with eyes that now showed genuine anger. "This is all her fault. This resentful housekeeper who always hated me, who stole my bracelet and is now making up stories to get money. She's probably trying to extort the family." Anna, sitting in the corner of the room with her knee bandaged, didn't respond. She just looked at Camilla with the serenity of someone who knows the truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. The union lawyer, a young man with an old briefcase and a worn but clean suit, held up a document. "I have here the complete work history of Anna Garcia. No prior record, impeccable references from all previous employers. And I also have," he took out her phone, "videos and photos taken last night showing Mr. Ernest responding to basic questions, recognizing his son's name with no signs of violence or dementia, only sedation." The social fallout was swift. In the following hours, as the administrative process began to move with the bureaucratic slowness typical of institutions, the news spread. In the luxury neighborhood where the Caldwell mansion stood, neighbors whispered on street corners, some more concerned with the neighborhood's image than with the old man. "What a scandal," they said over expensive cups of coffee. "I always thought that family had secrets." In Anna's neighborhood, Boyle Heights, the story spread as an act of bravery. In the apartment complex where her grandmother lived, the neighbors commented with pride, "Our Anna stood up to the rich folks and won." Francesca, sitting in her rocking chair with her rosary in her hands, cried with relief that her granddaughter hadn't been arrested or fired for good, that the courage she herself had tried to teach the child had finally borne fruit. The authorities, bound by regulations and procedures, moved slowly but opened a formal investigation. Ernest was transferred to a public hospital for detoxification and physical therapy. The doctors who examined him confirmed there were no signs of severe dementia or violent behavior, only the effects of prolonged sedation and lack of stimulation. Anna Garcia, though privately acknowledged by Alexander with tearful gratitude and promises that he would never forget what she had done, paid the price. Camilla, using the last vestiges of influence she had left, managed to have Anna suspended from the house while the facts were being clarified. She argued that she couldn't have someone in her residence who had trespassed on private property and broken protocols, even if the protocols were those of her own lie. Anna's first goal, to protect the old man, was advancing. Her second, to keep her job, was crumbling. Her internal conflict reached a breaking point when she was called to give a formal deposition. Sitting in a room at the district attorney's office in front of an official slowly typing on an old computer, her hands trembled in her lap. She could downplay what she knew, say that maybe she had been mistaken, that it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe then Camilla would let her come back. Maybe she would get back the job and the salary that kept her grandmother medicated. Or she could tell every detail and risk everything. Her livelihood, her reputation, her safety. She closed her eyes and saw her mother in that old kitchen, silent in the face of injustice. She saw Mr. Ernest in the wheelchair, his eyes lost, his voice a whisper. She saw the rosary her grandmother had given her years ago, saying, "When you have to choose between what is right and what is easy, choose what is right, and God will provide." She opened her mouth and chose the complete truth, with a firm voice that surprised even herself. She told them about the portrait that seemed to watch her, about the boxes of sedatives, about the hidden wheelchair, about Miguel and the taxi records, about Sister Rosa's courage, about every small detail that had led her to that moment. That decision was her conscious act of overcoming the fear of not being heard, the fear that had paralyzed her when her mother was humiliated, the fear that had kept her invisible her whole life. After finishing her testimony, she signed with a steady hand, stood up on her still sore knee, and walked out into the hallway of the public building. She sat on a worn wooden bench next to a dirty window overlooking the noisy street. The sky was overcast, threatening rain again, and the smell of bus exhaust mixed with that of fried food from a nearby cart. She looked at that gray sky and whispered, just to herself and to God, "Let it be your justice, not mine." Miguel appeared a few minutes later, carrying a coffee in a plastic cup he had bought from a street vendor. He sat next to her without saying anything, just handing her the warm coffee. They sat there in silence, two humble workers who had dared to challenge the established order and were now waiting to see if the world rewarded courage or punished audacity. A few months passed. The city continued with its usual noise, millions of people rushing between the subway and work, between hope and exhaustion. But for Ana Garcia, time was measured in small progresses that meant worlds. Mr. Ernest's unsteady steps with a new cane, the slow hearings of the case against the clinic, her grandmother's doctor visits, now with better managed prescriptions, thanks to what she had learned about medication during her investigation. Alexander, after separating from Camilla and accepting his responsibility as a son who had been blinded by comfort and misplaced trust, decided to rent a more modest house to live with his father, far from the drawing rooms where the lie had been built. It wasn't a mansion. It was a one-story house in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood, with a small backyard where Mr. Ernest could sit, in the sun on warm afternoons. In the dining room of this new house, the imposing portrait of Mr. Ernest no longer hung. Instead, a smaller copy rested on a bookshelf next to real family photographs, without studied poses. Anna, who now worked there as a formal caregiver with a signed contract and a decent salary that included health insurance, cleaned it with the same care as before, but with a different feeling. It was no longer the image of a dead man, but the symbol of a life reclaimed. On the opposite wall, the old shopping notebook had been transformed into an orderly record of medications, therapies, and appointments. Anna had learned a lot in those months, even taking a basic course on elderly care offered by the public hospital, and now she managed Mr. Ernest's routines with knowledge and affection. The wheelchair that had once been an instrument of confinement now served only as occasional support on tired days, covered with a blanket knitted by her grandmother in colors Francesca had carefully chosen, blue and white, like the clouds and the sky. Mr. Ernest recovered slowly, like someone waking from a very long sleep. In the first few days at the public hospital, he could barely stay awake. His head would droop. His words came out slurred. But week after week, month after month, the fog began to lift. He started to remember things: the name of the street where he was born, the recipe for the gumbo his late wife used to make the day Alexander took his first steps. Some memories returned clearly, others remained hazy, but the important thing was that he was present, alive, capable of smiling again. The consequences for the antagonists were firm, without gratuitous cruelty but without easy escapes. Dr. Sullivan lost his medical license after the administrative board confirmed the conflict of interest and the improper use of sedatives. He faced a criminal trial that would likely result in prison time, though his lawyers were negotiating a plea deal. In the local news, there was talk of other elderly patients who had been oversedated at the same clinic, families who were now demanding their cases be reviewed. St. Raphael's wellness retreat was under government receivership, its license suspended, its practices under investigation. Sister Rosa, who had dared to speak out even at the risk of her job, was transferred to another hospital with a special commendation for ethical conduct. Anna visited her once, bringing cheap flowers from the market, and the two women hugged in silence, understanding without words the weight of what they had done. Camilla, facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and false imprisonment, was living under court-ordered restrictions while awaiting trial. She had lost the shine of the social circle she had so carefully cultivated. The friends who once invited her to lunches at expensive restaurants now looked away when they passed her on the street. The luxury apartment she had rented after the separation seemed too big, too empty, too full of echoes. At one of the hearings, Anna saw her from a distance. Too thin, dark circles poorly concealed by makeup, still trying to justify herself to anyone who would listen. "I did what I thought was best," she repeated like a broken mantra. No one understands the pressure of maintaining a family, an image, a standard. There was no sudden change of character, no dramatic redemption, just a woman who had built her life on lies and now watched that edifice shrink until it had no audience, no applause, no stage. No one celebrated her downfall with hatred. Anna felt no pleasure in Camilla's misfortune, only a distant sadness for someone who had chosen the wrong path and was now reaping the consequences. Justice didn't need revenge to be justice. The emotional connections that had been sown with patience blossomed in small but significant daily gestures. Miguel spent Sundays eating soup at the new house, bringing his children who played in the backyard with the noisy joy of well-loved kids. Lydia, who had finally found the courage to leave the houses where she was mistreated, now worked at a cooperative laundry and accompanied Mr. Ernest to his physical therapy sessions, learning to stand up for herself in her own life. "You know what you told me once?" Lydia commented one afternoon while helping Mr. Ernest with his memory exercises. "You said that if the truth came from God, it would find an open door." You were right. And knowing that changed something in me too. Alexander, more present than ever, listened to the stories of the father he had almost lost. They would sit in the backyard on cool afternoons, Mr. Ernest in a rocking chair, Alexander in a plastic chair beside him, and they would talk. About the company the old man had built with his own hands, about mistakes and successes, about what it meant to be a real family and not just keep up appearances. "I'm sorry, Dad," Alexander had said one of those afternoons, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't see it. For trusting blindly. For being so absent." Mr. Ernest, with a hand that trembled but was firm in its intention, touched his son's shoulder. "Forgiven, my son. You didn't know. And now you're here. That's what matters." Anna taught Alexander memory exercises she had learned at the hospital. Card games, simple puzzles, conversations about the past that helped strengthen the neural connections still weakened by prolonged sedation. She watched them laugh together, father and son, recovering lost years one day at a time. Anna's grandmother, Francesca, visited on Saturdays, brought by Miguel in his taxi. She would sit next to Mr. Ernest, and the two elderly people would talk about life with the weary wisdom of those who have seen it all. He would talk about building a company from scratch, she about raising a granddaughter without a father or mother, and there was an understanding between them that needed no explanation. One Saturday afternoon, as he was saying goodbye at the door, Mr. Ernest placed his hand on Anna's shoulder. The gesture was slow, deliberate, full of meaning. He looked her in the eyes with that recovered clarity that was more moving than any words. "My dear girl," he said slowly, making sure every word was heard. "Thank you for not being silent when we were all asleep." Anna smiled, feeling hot tears well up but not letting them fall. She squeezed his wrinkled hand, felt the texture of skin marked by time and stolen years. "I only did what was right, sir." "No," he insisted. "You did what was brave, and that's not the same thing." She nodded, not trusting her voice to reply. She touched the rosary that she now wore hanging outside her apron, without hiding, without shame. The same rosary she had clutched on fearful nights, that she had carried to the clinic in the dead of night, that she had given to Sister Rosa as a promise of truth. The sun filtered warmly through the living room window, illuminating the portrait on the bookshelf, the notebook transformed into a medical log, the cane leaning against the chair, as if stitching the whole story together into a single, serene image. The golden afternoon light painted everything with a warm hue, promising that better days were not just possible, but were here, happening. Anna looked around that modest room so full of real life. Alexander and his father talking about baseball, Miguel playing with his kids in the yard, Lydia making coffee in the kitchen, Francesca knitting another blanket. They weren't rich. They didn't have a mansion or servants, but they had something money could never buy. They had truth. They had recovered dignity. They had each other. On that quiet afternoon, as the sun slowly set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Anna Garcia felt for the first time in a long time that the world might just make sense. It wasn't a perfect world. There was still injustice. There was still pain. But it was a world where truth could win, where the humble could raise their voices, where God heard the prayers whispered in narrow rooms. And then, in a low but clear voice, without adornment or flourish, looking out the window, at the sky that promised a new day, Anna Garcia said a sentence that hung in the house and in the hearts of everyone there. When truth walks hand in hand with God, sooner or later, it finds an open door. Everyone stopped what they were doing, turned to her, and for a moment, there was silence. Then Mr. Ernest began to clap slowly, and one by one, everyone else joined in. It wasn't the applause of a theater or a ceremony. It was the simple, profound acknowledgement that a humble woman, armed only with faith and courage, had changed the destiny of an entire family. And in that modest house, under the golden afternoon light, justice was no longer just a distant concept. It was real, alive, breathing in the air they all shared.